Formally kicked off. Thank you for those who've been with us and logged in. Some version of On Time, as Neal was just telling us, there's maybe a Zoom version of On Time and sort of a normal version of On Time. So it's so wonderful to have everyone joining us for this special event. My name is Austin Pick, the director of Naropa Extended Campus, which is Naropa's newly re-energized Extended Studies department, dedicated to continuing education, professional development, public programs, and special events just like this one. We have a lot of new offerings in the works, so please stay tuned. It's so exciting to have this technology, which enables us to connect with like-minded folks all over the country and all over the world. Tonight, it's my pleasure to introduce Anne Lamott and Neal Allen in conversation. Anne Lamott is the best-selling author of numerous books of essays, novels, and long-form nonfiction, including the classic writing manual Bird by Bird and the child-rearing memoir Operating Instructions. Anne's most recent book, congratulations Anne, is Dusk, Night, Dawn on Revival and Courage, just published in March by Riverhead Books. Neal Allen is a coach and writer who studies and practices traditional and contemporary spiritual traditions. His private coaching practice blends standard psychodynamics with A.H. Almas's diamond approach and Eastern practice methods. Neal's new book is entitled Shapes of Truth, Discover God Inside You, which presents a method of spiritual inquiry based on a set of 35 divine objects found within the human body and provides step-by-step instructions for encountering them yourself. We welcome Anne and Neal tonight to talk about their books, their spiritual practice journeys. It wouldn't be a Naropa event without talking about spiritual practice journeys and contemplative approaches, their interfaith marriage, and much more. We welcome Neal and Anne in conversation, and then we'll open things up to audience questions via the chat for the last part of our time together. We'll keep things organic, as you've seen if you logged in early. And if you have any tech issues, Angie is available to support those, and she can be reached in the chat. Once again, thank you all for joining us, and thank you, Anne and Neal, for including Naropa in your virtual book tour. Because this is Naropa, and because Naropa was founded by, was really founded by beat poets and Buddhist practitioners, it seems like a perfect intersection for contemplatives and writers. Since you both happen to be both, I would really be interested to kind of kick things off by maybe hearing some of your perspective about approaching writing as a contemplative practice, and maybe the interface between the two. So again, welcome and thank you, and we look forward to your conversation together.
Thank you.
Thank you, Austin, and thank you, Naropa. It's so thrilling. It's such an honor to be here. I actually came to a Naropa conference maybe 20 years ago to do a workshop on writing, and I remember that Deepak Chopra was here, and I had felt that he was beneath me because he was so popular that he couldn't possibly have a huge, great amount to teach me. And I think my mouth hung open for the 2 hours that he was speaking. I was really blown away, kind of permanently. There was a woman there, I'm not sure if she's still part of Naropa, named Max, and we completely bonded, and it was one of the most exciting 3 days of my life. And before we begin, just to address your question, Austin, I don't consider writing a contemplative practice. For me, it's just always hard, and I'd almost always rather be watching MSNBC, but I get these things inside of me that they're actually like a tug on the sleeve by something that wants me to help it get itself written. And I all of a sudden know, for instance, that I'm going to write a book on hope or writing, or with this book, a couple years ago, I've been traveling around when we did such things, on a book tour for my book on hope, which I forgot what it was called, but the subtitle was Thoughts on Hope. And everywhere I went, people were defeated and exhausted and did not have a lot of hope. And so I wanted to write a book that addressed that. And I had always loved the Gabriel Garcia Marquez book that's called Love in the Time of Cholera. And we were several years into Trump by then, and I didn't want to write a specific book on living under Trump, but I wanted to write a book about love and soul in the time of catastrophic political upheaval and pain and confusion. And so when I sit down to write, I have an idea usually for one thing that I might possibly be able to do. And I just do that. In Bird by Bird, I talked about a 1-inch picture frame and just looking through an empty 1-inch frame and seeing one passage, one essay, one vision, one conversation, and just letting myself do it really badly. So I just pushed back my sleeves and sat down. I sit down every day. I do have a habit. I do have a discipline. When I'm working on something, I do sit down every day, and I sit down at the same time. I don't write. I don't wait for inspiration or particularly believe in it, but I do get this tug on my sleeve that something inside me has come up with something that it thinks might be of value for me to put into words. What about you, Neal?
First, Naropa is semi-mythical to me. When I was a college student in Santa Fe, one of my classmates was a stepson of Gregory Bateson, and he would come back from summers with these incredible tales of some heroes of mine, people like Allen Ginsberg and Gregory Corso. Mm-hmm. And this guy he kept talking about, just who was called Rinpoche. I had no idea what that meant, or that it was an honorific and not an actual name. And he would just regale us with these stories about these spiritual and creative people who were all hanging out together and having fun, it sounded like. And I've always wanted to be there, and I'm at least there virtually for once in my life. Like Annie, I don't think of myself as a particular kind of writer, like a contemplative writer, rather than how I actually think of myself as a hack writer, because I spent most of my career as a hack writer, writing for daily newspapers and popular magazines, and then for corporations and writing speeches. And during all of that time, I learned about the beautiful feeling of writing when it was working. It took years for it to start to work for me. Took literally thousands of newspaper articles before I had the experience of finding my voice. And up to that point, it was all about learning the rules, and what I was writing about, because I was writing for newspapers and magazines primarily, was trying to get at the truth of something very rational and very specific and very concrete, very empirical, materialist, that familiar way of looking at the world, in a normal metaphysical way of looking at the world. And I learned how to look at things and put them down on paper so that they were accurately represented, and get the cause and effect and the things that were supposed to be next to each other so that it made sense. And I enjoyed doing that as a craft more than as a way to understand myself or understand the bigger world. Actually, in newspapers, I envied the people who wrote for serious magazines, because in newspapers, we could only ask a question that could be answered in the next paragraph. And that very much limited us to the very, very narrowest surface of things. But I learned how to write, and eventually, separately, I entered into an appreciation that there might be a world beyond that materialist, empiricist world that I was used to, the rationalist world that I was used to. And that was a chance encounter, being taken by a friend to a one-day retreat at Spirit Rock with Adyashanti. And it's a interesting story to me, but it's kind of boring story to relate. A miracle kind of happened in my presence to me while Adya sat up there. And I was quite struck by this, that I was a rationalist and atheist. And the next thing I knew, I was looking at a different kind of truth to look at, a different set of circumstances. It has never felt very different to me, spending my time sincerely pursuing truths that are a little beyond my materialist empiricist view, but they incorporate them and extend beyond them. And that activity of translating and articulating those truths back first to me and then at times to an audience feels in some ways exactly the same as it was when I was a newspaperman and there was nothing mysterious or woo-woo about the things I was looking at. I'm using the same structures really to understand the world. Sometimes Annie and I use the experience of writing to expand on our own understandings of how some of these more abstract and more spiritual things, phenomenologies or concepts or feelings or perceptions or existences or whatever we want to call them, sometimes the writing leads us into a place where we'll have an unusual conversation.
Sometimes if one of us is working on something that we know the other really loves to think and talk and read about, like spirit or soul or whatever, one of us, I might say to Neal, do you have a minute? Which means you have 45 minutes. And I'll say, can we talk about spirit? And of course, I'll have paper and pencil, and I'll say, what are we even talking about? What does spirit mean? And then he'll start saying what spirit means to him, and I'll say what spirit means to me, and then we'll start jamming, and I'm scribbling it all down. And it takes us to places that are so far out there, but really so describable, and that we think might be important to disseminate to readers or to people who come to listen to us. And then we'll both get really excited and we're kind of high afterwards. But I really recommend that for the writers here, is that you ask somebody who you love to talk to in general about the most meaningful topics, if they'll talk to you for a little while about this soul, for instance, or immortality or God or Christ consciousness or whatever. Because those have been some of my favorite times in our marriage, is when I can think of about 6 times we've done it, and we're both kind of blown away. But let me stop us both right now. And some of you know me from my work, my Bird by Bird and whatever. But I want to introduce you to Neal, who I met 5 years ago and married 2 years ago under duress. We met on Match. Well, there's actually a Match for old people called Our Time.
For decrepit people.
For the decrepit
yeah.
people. And we met, and we just started doing this thing we do, which is jamming, back and forth notes about a movie. Oh, did you ever see? Or how many times have you seen this Truffaut movie? Or how old were you when you read your first Vonnegut? Or what are the spiritual poets you love? And back and forth. And then all of a sudden, one terrifying day, he wrote me a description of the book that he was working on that turned out to be Shapes of Truth. And it was about his work in Diamond Heart and with Hamid Ali and his own spiritual practice. And it was about these shapes that were similar in some ways, that he'll talk more lucidly about, to Platonic Platonic forms inside of us, or to the Sufi mystics with 6 of these forms that they described. And I thought, oh no, A, he's a writer, and I bet he just wants the name of my agent. And B, this book just sounds like voodoo, it's like On Beyond Zebra. And so after we met for coffee, we were never apart again, except if one of us was out of town. And so I thought it was time to see if this guy could write, because it was going to be a problem if I didn't love his writing. And so I exchanged an essay with a piece he'd written for a quarterly that had just come out. And I was flooded with relief that it was really beautifully written.
I'm going to interrupt a second. And the odd thing about this was that I knew Annie was a writer, and I'd actually met her years before and I had heard her read once or twice. For 10 years earlier before I met her. And I don't remember, I probably did, but I don't remember having read her work before then. And so I had actually only read that I knew of one piece, which I was more interested in the content than the writing. She had written a piece I noticed that was online for Slate or somebody. Who was that for? Salon. And it was about dating online. And so I thought, this is cool. I get an inside track of what she expected and make sure that the bad parts were kept out. And I could hide all of the easy flaws that she was expecting to find. So oddly enough, this is Anne Lamott we're talking about. I had no idea whether she was actually a good writer. So I had very much the exact same experience that she did, which was worrying that I was going to read. She handed me something to read, worrying that what I was going to read was going to be badly written or clumsily written or whatever. And I was telling this a month later after this happened to an acquaintance of mine. And she just said, "Excuse me, you were worried whether Anne Lamott was a bad writer?"
So anyway, so this book had already started to take shape, but it was very, very intellectual. Neal is totally overly educated, whereas I am a nice dropout and a Sunday school teacher. And it had a lot of things, like a lot about Plato and a lot about Noam Chomsky. And so we started sharing with each other the stuff that we were writing on, and this book took shape. And then we spent a lot of time trying to help the other person just burnish it so that to bring it up to the highest possible caliber and quality. We'll talk about this more, but you may be wondering at this point what we're even talking about, what the shapes of truth are and where they exist in the body and how to access them. So I thought you might want to start off by either reading or just describing what these essential body forms are inside of every human being on earth.
Yeah. Hidden in your body is a set of 35 divine objects that represent aspects of God. They can grant immediate and sustained relief from everyday suffering. And each of them represents or corresponds to a common human emotional difficulty. But each of them also is an abstract noun of value or represent. It's like a pure form found without a word, but instead encapsulated in a color and a sense of shape inside you. And there might be a color for joy, and there might be a color for strength, and a color for will. And each of them is discriminated from the others. And they act as a fundamental and rudimentary vocabulary out of which you can build an idea of the human useful characteristics of God, who we would be if we were divine. And it turns out we are divine, and they're inborn, and all of us have them. And it's kind of surprising and unbelievable. And they were discovered, 5 or 6 of them were known to, depending on which text you look at, were known to the Sufi as early as the 13th century. But the other 30 or so were actually discovered, some of them in Boulder, and I assume some of them in Berkeley, by modern spiritual master some of you know as A.H. Almas, or that's his pen name. His real name is Hamid Ali. And he discovered them through a kind of pure Platonist inquiry into what exists, what exists within presence. He had found his way to presence, and then he wanted to know more about what's in presence. And these body forms started to appear, and he cataloged them. And as far as he and I have been able to figure out and research, they're unrelated to anything else that anybody else has described or cataloged. They're not related to a chakra system or to the tree of life. Those you would think would be obvious analogs to them. They're not Jungian. They don't have kind of cultural dependence, and they don't build into stories. They're very, it's just a vocabulary. They can be used in any path. He uses them brilliantly within the path called Diamond Heart, but the book takes it out of the context of Diamond Heart. The only thing that originally the book was going to be a kind of erudite academic version of what it ended up, and Hamid Ali assisted me along the way, particularly in the early version, but then it became more connected to the idea that you could take these out of the mystery school, out of the Diamond Heart school, and they would have other uses beyond that. And while they include a catalog that Hamid Ali reviewed, they're actually not part of the Diamond Heart, what he and participants in Diamond Heart call the Diamond Heart logos. So they're not, the book isn't a Diamond Heart book. It is a layman's book and an introduction to these objects to people who might find them useful on another path.
So I can tell you more specifically what the shapes are, how I have experienced them one time, and how they emerge, how we make contact with them, and how this whole process works. I wrote the foreword to the book, and it includes our first date. So this guy was gentle and kind, a little shambly, perhaps very observant, and an excellent listener. He was droll but subtle about it. I was a tiny bit discombobulated because, after all, it was a first date, but my main problem was less romantic. That very morning, I had decided to fire a longtime assistant. As I settled into my seat at the restaurant, I felt down and guilty. Being me, I might have mentioned this in passing with Neal. In fact, I'm sure I did. He didn't recoil at the overshare or express knee-jerk sympathy at my distress so much as he seemed deeply curious, so curious that I had a hard time changing the subject. After our second cup of coffee, we got down to the books we were each writing. His was called Shapes of Truth. "Oh," I asked prettily, "what is it about?" "Let me show you," he offered, and began to walk me through the process that he describes in this book. He told me to think about my difficulty that morning with my assistant. I closed my eyes to begin the interior visualization. He asked if I felt anything distinctive in my torso, and if so, where was it? I described a cramped feeling in my lower belly, anxiety I had over the firing. Neal asked me to describe the exact size of the area of tension, the shape of the area, its density and its color. It was an ugly stain, a spilled liquid, grayish brown, the density of mercury. He asked me to stay with it for a minute. I desperately wanted to run, but I sat quietly, partly because he has such a cute nose, but also because my stomach felt terrible, and I thought maybe this just might help. Then I noticed the strangest thing, that the gray-brown liquid was floating in an empty space, as if some of my internal organs had been pushed aside and had left behind a pristine staging area. After a while, he asked if the thing in my belly was changing in any way. Well, not fast enough, I can tell you that. But in fact, it had changed slightly and continued to, becoming wider and less dense, less like mercury. Then, after some time, it rose higher, eventually reaching my chest, much airier now, and then it slowly rose up my throat and into the air beside me, where it disappeared. In its place, I noticed a white balloon. An icky, thick, grayish-brown blob had transferred through attention and Neal's curiosity into a white balloon, hovering beside me and then magically inside me, too. Ah, Neal said, you went straight to the pearl. The pearl, I asked. Yeah, he said, the pearl, that white balloon, is kind of like looking straight at your own soul, or at least a part of it, as if you can see both your own divinity and your ability to function in the world from your divinity. So that was one experience. That was the first one I ever had, and I've had many ever since. Whenever I get very stuck, very clenched, and my mind is spiky, and I can't get out of it with any of my regular spiritual practices, I go to Neal and I ask if he can do the work with me. And we have found, a stripe of green that I thought at first was astroturf that took me back to my entire childhood terror, standing beneath a bald mountain from Fantasia, and then seeing through attention and curiosity and patience that at the end of this mountain was a little bit of blue sky. And a woman that was once asked him if he would do it with her at a dinner table, once found this shape that was just awful in her tummy, like angular and hurting her a little bit. And it rose up and it rose up and it rose up to right here. And it became a kidney bean shape. And little by little, she realized it was fetal, and it was her as she had been as a fetus. And usually with Neal and with this whole practice, the shape arises and comes beside you. And Neal asked her if it was moving and if she wanted to see if it would rise. And she said, no, no, no. I just want it to always be here so I can feel the baby of me inside me. So
Sweet.
So Neal, there's Austin.
Hi, Austin.
Hi, thank you for sharing. It's so interesting and beautiful. I thought I might jump in with a question just to, kind of help me to better relate, especially for folks who may be completely unfamiliar with this work until now.
Yeah.
Do you find that the shapes are universal? And if so, to what degree are they, or can they be sort of overlaid with one's sort of personal associations, which is kind of what I gathered from what Anne was saying about her kind of astroturf flavor that she experienced.
Yeah, I can't prove any of this, right? So this isn't double-blind tested, but it has been experimented with and known by, at any one time, 5,000 people within the Diamond Heart community are using the exploration of these in order to discover more about their own divinity and to get, out of their familiar restrictive materials empiricist lives into a broader view of things. And so as far as I can tell, as far as talking to people, looking around, they are universal, and they have a certain kind of purity that is essential to them, in the sense that we have a word strength, we have a word will, we have a word value. Why would I need something other than a word? Why would I need a color inside me instead of, I could just turn to the word? The problem is that words bend and move and get really cluttered with associations. And so they tend to be unreliable and tend not to be universal. They tend to actually lack universality, and we tend to spend a whole lot of time asking each other to better define what that word means so that we're on the same page. And they can lead us astray, as we all know. And there are ways in which, when we use words, we are reifying things that are false. And that's part of being a human being. And we're going to do it sometimes. And we're going to, if you go into a spiritual path, you're going to spend a fair amount of time trying to clean up all of your verbal assumptions. The thing about these very simple forms inside is they've got none of the, they don't seem to have cultural attachments. They seem to be so simple and so fundamental that they can only be seen as building blocks. They don't carry a story with them. They just carry that I have, oddly enough, inside me. For instance, there's one that's actually called value, right? And it's amber, and it looks like the stone of amber, and it's got that smokiness to amber and that mystery that you have in amber. But it's a different kind of value than I've ever seen. So if I'm using value in my head, I'm thinking no matter what, there's a little bit of transaction in there. There's a little bit of externalized value giving me my value, right? And that's going to get me in trouble, right? The value that I find that's an amber object inside me, and that Annie will find and you will find, and it takes a while to find it, maybe, but you're going to find it. It's there as far as I can tell. That value is a kind of remarkable intrinsic value that doesn't require anything to associate with it, right? I don't get my value by doing something. I'm born with this value. I have the same value. It's perfect. It's always there within me. I die with the same value. I can't add to it and I can't subtract from it. And he's got the exact same value that I have, and you have the exact same value that I have. So one thing that these objects do is they remind us that that ineffable soul that we've been told about, that ineffable selfness that doesn't have identities attached to it, maybe it's not as ineffable as we think. Maybe we can actually talk about it, and maybe there are ways that we can know it and spend time with it, and maybe they're instructive, and maybe they give us a way to actually believe that we can function out of them, and I don't know whether they're helpful for an entire life, but they're certainly helpful for the period in which a person is trying to rid him or herself of identities and wants to get to that I am that lacks another word that follows it. And I can both be I am that lacks another word and have strength and have value and have will and have differentiated capacities within me that function in the world.
Let me interrupt too. Krishnamurti, who I just love so much, said 50 years ago, he said, once you tell a child the word for bird, he never sees anything again but the fact that he knows the word bird. And when he sees this creature of grace and mystery and aerodynamic beauty, he doesn't see that anymore. He doesn't see the miracle. He doesn't see the mystery. He starts going bird, bird, bird. And so the words tend to be something that don't offer us the richness of experience and of noticing and of like a color. I'm always, if I'm doing the work with Neal, I'm often trying to wrap it up nicely in a description or a sentence that I think is sort of pleasant. And he'll say, why don't you let's just stay with that a minute, and it will change, and it will go from like I had this image a couple of weeks ago of this really beautiful Asian wallpaper or lining of a drawer, and I thought, well, I would just like to stay there. I mean, I'm not crazy. I love that rather than the blackish gray blobby mercury. And it was like, well, let's see what happened. Well, it has these shapes and these colors don't quite have a mind of their own, but they are a mind of their own. They're part of the one mind. And so when you pay attention and you stay with them, they reveal something that trying to put it into words for me can't. I want to say two quick list things too, Neal, before we go on. One is at the end of Shapes of Truth, there is a catalog, and I believe it's the first catalog of the 35 shapes on the Diamond Heart Path. And there's another list. I mean, it's funny, I've just made a case for not bogging down in words, but if you go to Neal's website at shapesoftruth.com, he has 34 great, amazing writing tips. Although he always announces that he has 40, but he only has 34, but they're really helpful for anybody here who's writing.
I wanted to thank you. And the writing tips are kind of the fact that I thought of writing as a craft, right? Annie can talk to you brilliantly about writing as an attitude and as a condition of life. And these are just sort of nuts and bolts, they're less writing tips actually than editing tips, how to go back in and see how to improve a sentence or whatever. I wanted to, we've talked a lot about these shapes and, they're kind of weird and trippy and slightly unbelievable and all of that. And this is an experiential adventure. And a lot of people believe that they're either good or bad and at experiencing their body or knowing their body or being able to feel things in their body. And they know there are people out there who can find subtle dimensions in their body, and other people who, and maybe you think that you're a person who isn't one of those people. You've never had much body sensing. You don't get off on doing body work. This is so simple to do and so non-demanding, and you don't have to know anything about somatics. You don't have to know anything about your body. And if you sit down with somebody and get that person to ask you a series of very simple open-ended questions, the odds are about 10 to 1 you will experience these. And it's very peculiar. The most rational friends of mine, atheists and people who have absolutely no need for anything spiritual or woo-woo, have the exact same experience as my most far gone spiritual friends.
And also, it's so wonderful because we're doing this kind of work. It has gotten me so out of my head, out of this terrible radio station that's like having a bad roommate that likes to go everywhere with me and judge and observe and then try to see if I can use it in my work. And instead, it has moved me so much into my heart and my belly. I mean, they're sort of in the solar plexus. This is where the shapes for me have always shown up, and I'm just so much more aware of them and out of my head, which is what heaven is like for me, for a very thinker like myself. Austin, I'm wondering if there's any questions from the audience yet that you might want to ask.
There are, thank you. Yeah, there's actually a constellation of really interesting questions that I'll try to ask as a couple. I think one question that has come through several times in different forms is, are we talking about literal shapes in the body, or are we talking about sort of imaginal projections of psychological or spiritual or soul-oriented features in as part of our being? And to what extent, if any, do the shapes correlate to things like the chakras or other systems that we may be familiar with in different contexts, which also have color associations and energy associations. So some questions around that, and also I think some curiosity about, is it just a mental visualization? Are we talking about more of a feeling tone quality to the experience? And, for the skeptic in us, I think you've already kind of started to speak to this, Neal, but how might we relate to becoming more friendly with this idea, for the kind of inner skeptic?
Yeah, absolutely. Great questions. The only way I can describe it is that it appears to me to be a sort of middle realm. There's a realm of my imagination. And in the realm of my imagination, I might include dreams, I might include fantasies, I might include my ability to invent worlds, right? And then I have my realm that I feel like I'm in a material reality with other people, and things have names and they appear the same to you as to me, and we've agreed on formal vocabulary for everything. These, when they show up, they're somewhere in between. They aren't in the realm of my imagination. They aren't in the realm of my physical and materialist view of the world. I have a particular view on this. I don't know that anybody else has this view, but I have a view that this is a realm that is best described by Plato as and is taught as the Platonic ideals, and never shows up as an actual realm in Plato. Plato always falls slightly short of describing what these ideals would feel like, look like phenomenologically. In most cases, for most people who experience them, it is a physical sense of a color in particular, in a particular location. And sometimes, often, most of the time, that color is contained within a sphere or a rectangle or a blob that is halfway between imagination and reality. It's not like any other thing that I imagine. It has a little more sense of reality than that. Mm-hmm. But it's also, even though it has a strong sense of reality, I know perfectly well that my organs haven't actually moved out of the way. I don't have a physical capacity for my organs to move out of the way and hollow out. And yet, while it's happening, everybody has that exact same experience of having a hollowed out space. Sometimes the space is just a color. Sometimes the space has a sense of an object within it.
Mm-hmm. And for me, it has often felt like it felt like a snow globe inside me, inside my torso, that there was a globe, or like one of those hard sugar Easter eggs where I could see inside, and inside was a shape or this colorful material, visualized, very interior reality inside of the snow globe, something that I could observe. I wasn't tripping. It wasn't happening into my head. It was inside a globe, inside a shell, and I could describe it. And if Neal would say, what do you see? I would say, well, I see a very, very light yellow circle. And he would say, well, how big is it? And I'd say, well, it's about this big. It's probably about a 4-inch sphere. And does it have a texture? Yeah, it feels a little bit pebbly. It's not a smooth surface. It's a little bit pebbly. And then he would repeat it. So you see a light yellow circle, and it's a little bit pebbly. It's 4 inches or so, and it's not smooth. It's got little tiny indents. Is that what and
yeah, I mean, the trick is to ask non-leading questions, right? I ask, how wide is it? How tall is it? How thick is it? What's its density? Is it like wood, metal, liquid, or air? What is its surface? Is it shiny or smooth? Is it floating? Is it moving? And then I'm done, right? I've asked that series of questions, mm-hmm. and it's an odd thing. Everybody will evoke an object if you ask that series of questions, mm-hmm. and that mm-hmm. object will take on certain qualities, in particular color and shape, also take on texture and smell, and for some people sound, for other people, but the main attributes are color and shape. Mm-hmm. And when the divine object appears, it's usually accompanied by a feeling of contentment that is comparable to that thing so well described by the Buddhists as equanimity. It's that kind of satisfaction or contentment or self-satisfaction in which there isn't a sense that I've cleared up something that was an emotional burden or something that was wrong. It's more a sense of general well-being, that, oh, this is who I'm supposed to be, actually. Mm-hmm. It's kind of unbelievable until you do it, but when you do it, it becomes very simple and mm-hmm. oddly believable. I mean, I'm always struck by the fact that people come you go into a bit of a trance while it's happening, and you come out of the trance, and then people are just like, oh, what was that? You know, not, wow, that was weird. My organs moved.
It's so interesting to be reading the questions as they come in. There are some questions about, can this work be done by oneself?
Yeah.
Is it necessary to have someone prompt and ask questions?
Yeah,
Oh, sorry, I was just gonna add to that. Are there instances where you know of people who sort of independently discover these shapes, or these shapes have kind of manifested in their kind of spiritual contexts, different traditions or things like that? Is the list of shapes complete? And I really like this question too. Do you only see these shapes and colors when you're distressed? Are there particular mind states that are more conducive to relating to them, in other words?
Well, that's a lot of questions, and
Yeah.
I'll see if I can remember them. The first one is critical, the one about why do you need another person to do it? I wish I could say you can conjure them up yourself. It's just hard. It's just way too hard to do that, and people just don't do it. It is so much easier to have somebody else independently asking you a series of questions. And I think a lot of the reason for that is that, like a lot of spiritual work, you're battling through your inner critic or your superego or your gremlin, whatever you want to call it. It doesn't want you in there. It always wants you to be your familiar self, your social self, part of the species, helping the species, and not paying attention to your individuality or paying attention to what about you exists that isn't related to the productivity of the world. And I think that having the person next to you asking the questions bypasses the danger and the difficulty of getting past the inner critic's voice. For whatever reason, most people can't do this on their own for quite some time. They have to do it 20 times, 30 times before they really start to be able to get the hang of it and be able to do it themselves. And by that time, they've gotten a huge amount of the benefit of doing it, right? So I'd like it to be easier. It isn't easier. In that sense, it's easy, it's simple once you've got somebody sitting next to you. As far as Hamid and I can figure out, they do not correspond to any other systems. And there's probably a reason for that. And the reason is they are more fundamental than a system, and they're building blocks for any system, I think, rather than organizing you into a progressive path toward some kind of attainment or non-attainment, however you want to look at that. They are independent operators for particular emotional issues that you might run into in your life. At first, they arrive mostly as you focus in on a particular emotional suffering that you're going through, or a conflict or something. What I'll tell people is, think about a conflict you've had with a friend or anybody, any conflict you've had, small or large, over the last day or two. And then once they've got something in mind, I say, just get rid of that now. Forget that you did that. Now go inside. And then I start asking the questions, and something's evoked. The thing that's evoked usually relates to that emotional suffering. And so they do have that kind of connection to what's going on in your life at any one time. You can also want to see you go into the catalog and you see, ooh, I want to see this one. It's possible after a while you can go in and use it to kind of catalog yourself. Is it a comprehensive list? Close, but probably not. Hamid, for instance, remembers having seen two other body forms, two other of the objects, but he can't. He never worked with them, and so they don't appear because there's no way they're not. he doesn't have a description of them that's useful. My guess is that these 35 are complete enough that even if there are a few more, they're of what's that term when it's of declining value?
I forgot.
Anyway, that by the time you've done 8 or 10 or 12 of them, and there are 5 of them that are kind of right up front that the Sufi did that have a particular helpfulness. Once you've done those, then you start to actually notice that that's who you are. You know, you're not your little defensive self. It's another way of finding, oh, I actually am this divinity.
Can I interrupt?
Yeah.
One of the questions you asked was from somebody saying, do you only do this in times of distress?
Yeah.
And I would say I usually do this in times of distress, but the work Neal does with his clients, and really I would say one of the major theme of this book, or the gift of these shapes, is with quieting the inner critic. And so when my critic is trying to keep me small, my superego is trying to keep me small and safe and under control, and it tells me this stuff about myself, which is that I'm not that good at this or that, or I always screw this up at the last minute, or I always balk, or this, or I go too far, or I talk, or whatever. When I'm there, when the bad radio station's on, that's when it's most profound for me to say to Neal, I'm there. And so it's this work with the inner critic that for me, it's the existence of the inner critic, or what Neal would call the superego, that is most excruciating for me, that voice that is just not on my side, that doesn't want me to have freedom. And this book is a way to freedom. And the way to freedom is to quiet that voice that tells you who you are. You're this and that, you're good at this, you shouldn't bother with that, blah, blah, blah. So it's funny because this book has evolved over the 5 years we've been together. He actually sold it to 2 different publishers, but we didn't love the experience. And he bought it back from both of them. But each time that it was in somebody else's hands, they would bring forth something that was kind of wonderfully obvious to people that weren't immersed in it, like he and me. And so little by little, it became plainer. You know, it's the thing I love about it is it's very welcoming. It's very the way he writes, and the book itself is very friendly about these profound and trippy shapes and experience and body forms, essential forms inside of us. But somehow, little by little, working with them has quieted down that toxic, opinionated voice from childhood that says, I'm great at this, I'm really good at that. Whenever I do this, people like me more. I should not do this at all. Really, don't bother. I'm too old. I'm 67. There's no point in developing this aspect of my soul, of my, you know. And so when the person asked if it's the shapes only come to you only under distress, it's not that they would come to you anytime that you got quiet, and it helps to sit with a loving or safe friend, because that is sort of a better defense against that inner critic. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. That was an interesting question also when you gave that string of questions. The last one I think was, is this an energetic presence? And
Yeah.
I don't talk about this in the book because for a lot of people, as far as I know, they don't experience this. But certainly when I was learning these, and you can learn them outside of, you can learn them within the Diamond Heart approach, for instance, one after another. You move through the catalog one after another, and first you learn joy, and then you learn strength, and then you learn will, and right. In doing that, you attempt to experience and come into the presence of them. Some of them any individual might come into the presence of or might not, right? Some are more easily accessible. When you're doing it that way, when you're doing it outside of that kind of structure, the ones that are most important to the person I'm working with will arrive, right? The energetic presence was interesting to me when I was going through them within the Diamond Heart approach. One thing that they do is that they assist in disassembling structures of the ego, like a particular structure aligned with a particular emotional belief will encounter or evoke one of these objects, and when that body form or essential aspect is evoked, over time, when I evoked it over and over and over again, and it kept addressing that same emotional issue and kept seeing that same body form, there was a point at which the body form would suddenly kind of wipe out the structure, the emotional structure, once and for all. And then I would have a period of shaking or a kind of energetic, very strong energetic movement, sometimes for 5 minutes, sometimes for a few hours. And I got used to that, oh, that's an essential aspect, integrating into and kind of rewiring me, integrating into myself. It was an interesting experience to have. And once I had kind of moved through all of the essential aspects that I was going to move through, I stopped having that experience. It does have an energetic capacity to restructure myself. But then after that, I don't think that any of these really appears as an energy form.
Mm-hmm.
That's getting, but that's getting pretty esoteric, and I don't know how many people. I haven't talked to a lot of people who encountered it that way. Might be some of us encounter it that way, and other people encounter it another way. It might depend on what kind of path we're on when we encounter them, or where on a path we are when we encounter them. I have no idea.
What else do people seem to want to know?
Yeah, it's so wonderful how you both kind of found your way into speaking about kind of benefits from the practice, or how this work may be healing, because there've been a number of questions about, well, sort of on the spectrum from like, what is it, so what, to sort of, what are the real healing benefits? And I heard both, I think, that this practice can provide a real ability to shift one's sense of self-reference, which can allow sort of, stuck patterns to kind of come unstuck, and that can, translate into kind of a different sense of one's egoic constriction. More practically, I think there's a lot of questions about sort of how do you do it? Is it better in the context of kind of a meditative practice? And there's also kind of a more grounded question too about how this and maybe other practices fit into your own life as writers and as a household of writers, whether, how you maintain the kind of solitary time that you might need to write. I know at the beginning you spoke about jamming together, but I imagine that's probably not a major part of the writing practice. So some questions there as well.
Well, we do the jamming and this kind of interactive tripping out together usually when one of us is stuck. And he writes in a office right next to where I'm sitting right now, and I write in an office that's attached to the house. And we write, our days are completely different. And yet we're together all day. I got married 2 years ago, 3 days after I got Medicare. And then 1 year later, we were in lockdown. And, I'm very much a Christian, and I have a prayer practice. I wake up, I say my prayers for quite a while. Then I put on my glasses and let the dog out. And Neal, and then when I'm working, there's a whole chapter on this in Bird by Buddha. I ask for a lot of help, and I ask for an edit from Neal. And I also hate criticism, and I can't bear being criticized. But both of us understood from the very beginning that if we were going to give each other work to look at and be edited, we really wanted the most honest response that we could do. So I don't ever read Neal's stuff and treat it like, like an ashtray that your child made, where you say, oh, did you make this? I push back my sleeves, and I know I'm going to love it. He tends to be very esoteric, and I tend to be much more plain spoken, and somewhere in between. Both of us can get a lot more playful because we feel safe. We feel really seen. I love his work and he loves mine, and everything we write contains stuff that we don't love, and that for almost every writer I've ever known, the first 3 paragraphs are usually just throat clearing and trying to convince the reader that they should continue along. And so Neal might come and say, these first 2 paragraphs, I don't think you need them, but right here is where it starts. And this is what I would like you just to develop at the very beginning. And then it's really good for a few pages. And then and then you introduce something that I think might be a bit of a tangent and that not necessary, and breaks up and back and forth. And I just sit there, and sometimes I tear up because I'm so sensitive to criticism. And then I am flooded with relief that he is keeping me from looking bad out in the world, or sending work to my agent or editor that's really not ready to go. And we both work very hard. We're both really perfectionists. There's also a chapter in Bird by Bird about getting over the perfectionism, because I do think it's the voice of the oppressor. But so Neal wants the toughest edit I can give him. And then sometimes he gets really defensive. And then I just have to kind of roll my eyes and pat him and say, it's your book, it's your essay, it's your piece. And but then he goes away and he knows I was right all along. And so he almost always does whatever I suggest, and vice versa.
Yeah, and vice versa. I thinking about the question, we actually do one thing in common that might be slightly unusual, which is that I grew up in Western metaphysics and studied a fair amount of philosophy, and as an undergraduate at least. And a number of the kind of favorite philosophers who everybody reads, I'm thinking, for instance, Plato, Kant, and Kierkegaard, all are famously said, and that's where I stop, because now we're entering into the realm of God and it's ineffable, and I won't write anymore about that. I won't write about, there's a line and I won't cross that line and write. And Plato said, it's bad to write at that point, right? That having something to do with, now you're stuck in memory, you're not in presence. And there are nice metaphysical reasons why these Western philosophers would say that. I think both Annie and I doubt that. I think we both think that there's some value, and people will have some interest in our writing in our own different ways about the ineffable, about what's supposed to be ineffable. That when she's writing about events that turn into a discussion of Jesus or a discussion of an Old Testament prophet, and then back into the events, she's basically showing that the stuff that's in the parable can be talked about, and when I'm writing about the divine, I think there's a phenomenology there that can be described. I think that there are feelings and sensations that accompany what are usually considered ineffable dimensions of strange metaphysics. And I think in that way, I think we both kind of would be skeptical of somebody saying, don't write that, it's ineffable.
Also, Neal, I mean, he's very, very intellectual, and yet he does his body work with his clients, and he does his spiritual work with him. His whole life is about seeking truth and being in it, and being in the moment, and finding ways to get away from the perfectionism and the inner critic, and just to be, as mine is. But he's writing at this this one way, and I really write my religious or spiritual stuff for my Sunday school kids. I'm trying to explain or point out to kids what grace looks like. And it might be from a Bible story, and it might be from the seashore where we go to pick up litter one day. And that I teach them that grace is spiritual WD-40, and really simple concepts like that. I do not have an interesting theological life, and I don't read esoteric spiritual stuff. And Neal does. I mean, he's getting a master's in the Eastern classics right now, and he is reading the most lofty spiritual books that exist in the world. And I'm thinking about how to describe our soul to my class, which might be 3 kids, one of whom is 7 and one of whom is 15. So I'm constantly, like, without dumbing it down, trying to, I believe in plain song for me. You know, I keep it really simple. And both of us, this is common to both of us, we see it most frequently in nature. And so we're both completely immersed in nature and in the stillness and in quiet. And he expresses something interior in a certain way that is kind of brilliant, but I think welcoming. And I'm explaining it in a way that I hope my favorite 2 12-year-old students might grok, you know, and be able to hold on to and take with them when class is over. Do you have a couple more questions, Austin?
I do, and I love the way there's just kind of a progression emerging. You teed it up so well. First of all, I love what you said about writing into the stuff that's supposed to be ineffable and the different ways that you have of approaching that. I think that's really beautiful and a fascinating kind of compliment. There are questions about how does this approach associate with God and Christianity, and what is what are your conceptions of God or divinity? I know God's in the title of Neal's book. So those questions are really interesting as well.
Yeah, God. So
That.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many different ways of looking at God. See that for me, the whole spiritual not path, but all these explorations are a series for me of disruptions of getting stuck in a particular metaphysics. And so every metaphysics has its own God, right? You got at least 4 that I've seen, at least 4 non-dualisms out there. There's a non-dualism where you've got material here and oneness over here, and they kind of don't merge, but they sit on top of each other. And then you've got a non-dualism that goes all into absorption. And then you've got and you've got these different kinds of non-dualism, and each of them evokes a different God. And then you've got your Kantian God that basically is evoked because we can't stand being stuck in time and space. So we have to invent this guy who sits outside of time and space in order to feel free. And then you've got the God with the beard, and you've got the God that is consciousness with a big C. And they're all right. They're all God. They're all different ways to approach how do I get out of getting stuck in my old ways and see life as it emerges right now, and be able to explore it and love it as it's emerging right now. And sometimes I need a God with a beard, I suppose. And sometimes I need a pervasive unity to represent God. And sometimes I might need absorption. But generally speaking, I think I sit in a fairly light place of thinking that there is, instead of a thin reality that's material empiricism that I got raised in, and most of us experiences the familiar life. This is a table, and it's the same table that it was yesterday. And I can live in a thin world of eruption and flowering, and I get to both feed myself and clothe myself and house myself, and at the same time look around and be amazed at what's showing up all around me. I tend to think that if there were a God, that God wouldn't give us any other purpose than to be fascinated by what is.
And I can tell you, my understanding of God in one story, which is this conviction, this experiential understanding and conviction that there is a love energy that surrounds us that you might call Christ consciousness. It's evolutionary. It's like the great French Jesuit Teilhard de Chardin said that we are evolutionary beings, that we are evolving towards Christ consciousness. I believe that. But I've been in recovery for almost 35 years, and there was a woman years ago who had a terrible, terrible oral cancer, and they'd had to cut away part of her jaw, a little bit of her jawbone and part of her tongue. And so she had this crazy speech impediment, but beautiful, beautiful spirituality of gratitude, curiosity and gratitude. And she'd had tough chemo and radiation, the whole thing. And many years later, it came back, and she was sharing this in a meeting of recovery, and that she was going to have to go through the process again of radiation and chemo, and everybody just started fluttering around with good ideas and ways to cheer her up or help. You know, my beautician's nephew had that same cancer, and he's just fine now, blah, blah, blah. And she just waved it away like so much cigarette smoke, and she said, you know what, God's got it. And I wear that on a chain around my neck. Some friends had it made for me because it's all I need to remember. All I need to know is that God's got it, that God is goodness, that God is grace over drama. It's grace over drama and mental spiking, catastrophizing or judgment or whatever. It's just goodness. It's divine love energy that indwells me, that surrounds me, that I see most in other people's faces, and that I experience most with God with skin on, in the love, the precious community, the miracle of the helpers, and the loyalty of 2 or 3 best friends, my husband and my son, and 2 or 3 friends. I could write a whole book on that. Maybe I have, but anyway, maybe we have time for one more question. I'm starting to get hungry, and I have to go have dinner in a minute, or I'll become cranky and less adorable.
Amen. Thank you so much, both of you, for sharing. I think there have been themes tonight in terms of the value and the depth that you find in the different kinds of work that you do about getting unstuck from our habitual places, our constricted places. And I just heard in what you were saying, a sense of surrender and acceptance of grace in allowing us to find ways to approach the things that are unapproachable, right? Yeah. There have been some questions about what's next for the two of you. And I think there are also questions about what's next for those who are with us tonight listening, who are interested in maybe trying this work out or getting connected with aspects of practice that you've described.
Well, I don't know. I've been promoting my book for 2.5 months, and now we're promoting Neal's book. And if I never see another book with either of our names on it, it won't be soon enough. And I don't really have a plan to write right now. I love the idea of not writing. Neal's in the middle of 3 different books. But, just in closing, what I would say to people listening, you go to shapesoftruth.com. There is a lot of information there. There are there are the 34 writing tips, but also there's a lot of Neal's work and what he thinks and what, certain themes of the book that he writes about. There's a piece, there's an excerpt at Spirituality and Health that's really beautiful on compassion. That's a big part of the book, Shapes of Truth. There are just a lot of ways to start kind of tiptoeing into this trippy but friendly realm that involves stillness and quiet and breath and attention and curiosity, which are all attributes of God and all very important parts of the Diamond Heart path. Colorado is a huge hotbed of Diamond Heart, and there are communities you can plug into. But if the people listening tonight can find one person who can read a little bit about it, either at his website or or listen again to this podcast, or read the book. You just need one other person who has some time for you and who is so glad and excited that you'll make some time for them. And you sit together and you say, so what's been going on lately? And you'll be just amazed. Every single person I've ever seen do this work afterwards starts to laugh, because it brings such peace and it brings such surprising information about yourself and your soul and your heart and your life that I haven't seen accessed in any other way.
She said it all. I mean, I'm not an evangelist, and at root, I'm a Krishnamurti type who doesn't trust institutions at all and doesn't join things. But for me, and that doesn't mean necessarily for anybody else, actually entering into the Diamond Approach Mystery School was a fantastic and earth-shaking experience. And my years, 6 or 7 years off and on that I was in it, really were transformative in the way that people talk about things being transformative. And I think it's particularly efficient in its work to remove obstacles of the ego. It's really brilliant that way. And if somebody needs a path or is looking for a path, that's a fine one. It happened. All I'm saying is it's the one that kind of centered me. I'm not saying it's better or worse, or there aren't. I know there are many paths, and well, they don't all go to the same place. They go to similar places, a lot of them. And then the book kind of stands alone to be used by people personally and experientially, and it describes in great detail actually how to do that. And I don't know how people are going to use it. That's not my business, you know. I don't know whether it's helpful or not. That's not my business. My only business was, there's this really, really fascinating and for me useful spiritual adventure that I've never seen talked about anywhere else. And let me show it to people.
Yeah, and I think also, not to toot my own horn, but if you just read the foreword I wrote, it's a really good way to meet Neal and Diamond Heart and the Shapes of Truth. So it is such an honor to be at Naropa. I can't even tell you, Austin. It was a dream come true for us. We couldn't believe when we met you and you said that you would give us a night here. It's really a dream come true. It's really a high point for me.
This is really cool to be able to talk about this kind of stuff at this level is it's a real luxury for us.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. It feels like a natural fit for Naropa. And earlier you were talking about teaching Sunday school, and I was like, maybe we should do Sunday school with Anne as another event. In closing, go ahead.
No, I just make sure you've got construction paper and crayons ready.
And glue sticks. The basis of my Sunday school are Capri Sun and glue sticks.
We love experiential practice and art at Naropa, so it really could probably work. Neal, you were saying before, like, it's not your business to know whether, this work or this book as an offering is helpful or not. But I definitely invite you to read the chat transcript after we close here, because there have been so many lovely things said about both this conversation and the impact that both of you and your work have had on people. So it's been really heartwarming to see that. Are there any other final things you'd like to share before we formally kind of close out?
Thank you so much. I hope we get to see you in person in the next year or so. It would really be wonderful to just sit and jam.
Yeah, it would be really great. Well, thank you so much. We had kind of an organic start to the evening, and we didn't do the Naropa Bow to begin our evening, but we can certainly do the Naropa Bow to end our evening. So the Naropa Bow is a tradition that we open and close events with and classes. And really, it's very simple. Just take your seat, find a moment of presence, and then we bow to acknowledge the time that we have shared together. Again, thank you so much, and thanks to everyone who was able to join us tonight. It's been a really special opportunity to connect and to go deep.
Thank you, Austin. Thank you, Naropa.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.